Coming up on this episode, we're reaching crunch time in the Lauri Markkanen situation. I'll go through the latest from NBA insider Mark Stein. Plus, I feel like I've been sitting on the fence a little bit about this. I'll give you my answer on what I think the Warriors' final offer should be to the Utah Jazz for Markkanen. Does it include young guard Brandon Podziemski? That's the debate. We'll continue on this episode. Welcome back to the Golden State with Mates podcast. We are less than 48 hours away from Lauri Markkanen becoming extension eligible with the Utah Jazz, which is the growing belief that he will renegotiate his deal for next season and extend with the franchise. But if you have been following these episodes over the past 2 or 3 weeks, you would know my stance is that if a trade were to take place, it would happen around this time, 24 to 48 hours before that August 6th deadline comes into place where he becomes extension eligible. Perhaps there's a deal just after that. The expectation, of course, is that he will sign probably after August 6th or on August 7th or beyond, just to ensure that he takes himself out of trade calculations at the mid-season deadline. Before we get more into that, I just wanted to briefly mention the Olympics, where we're now up to the quarterfinal stage. Of course, in the basketball, and we've got a couple of Warriors playing against each other on Tuesday, with Steph Curry and Team USA going up against Guy Santos and Brazil. Of course, Steve Kerr, coach of Team USA as well. Both players will have big roles in that. Steph, there's obviously been a lot of chatter about his performances thus far at the Olympics, which have been disappointing, and that's probably to put it nicely, particularly his last 2 games. 1 of 9 shooting 3 points against South Sudan was particularly disappointing. He was a bit better in the final group game, but still I think he's only 2 of 12 shooting from beyond the arc in the last 2 games. So there's a lot of chatter about Steph. Am I concerned at all from looking at this from a Warrior standpoint? No, not at all. This is I personally, I think I read far less into FIBA basketball than what some others might. And to put that into some context, when looking and evaluating it like NBA players and what they could do going into the next NBA season, I buy far more into NBA preseason than I do FIBA basketball during the offseason in terms of, could this player take a step, or what level will this player be at in the next NBA season? Because I just think like FIBA basketball, whether it's the Olympics, the World Cup, doesn't matter what it is, it's a completely different environment, different setting, different rules, and completely different team. Right? Like the role that you're going to have on your international team is often so different to what you are going to have on your NBA team. And I think Steph's finding that out at the moment, where he goes from being the out and out lone superstar for the Warriors to being one of multiple all-star level players with Team USA. And he doesn't necessarily get that opportunity to shine. And it goes the other way a lot for players, where they go from being a role player in the NBA to being a star for their international team. You look at a guy like Dennis Schroeder, Germany and Canada, probably the biggest threats to Team USA for the gold medal right now. They're obviously world champions. Dennis Schroeder was MVP of that tournament last year, and he's playing very well again alongside Franz Wagner for Germany. I know from an Australian perspective, Patty Mills, there's often an ongoing joke, I suppose, in Australia that when Patty Mills puts on a Boomers uniform, that he turns into prime Steph Curry, and that's there's an element to that, because he just, like, his performances going from the NBA, and he's had a very long, successful NBA career, there's no doubt about that. But again, when he puts on a Boomers jersey, he just turns into something different, where he's putting up so many more points. And again, it just goes down to the usage, right? It goes down to the usage. But even like someone like Patty, like his shooting splits can often go up. He just turns into a different player. And that's why I don't buy a whole lot into FIBA basketball. And then like you look at an NBA preseason, at least you can say that is part of the same team setting that they're going to have going into the regular season. Like there is some element of comparison there, where I don't think that's the case in FIBA basketball. Like I just do not buy into performances, good or bad. And again, if you guys have been listening, watching these episodes, and you've heard me talk about Josh Giddey, again, I'll go back to him. If I'm a Chicago Bulls fan, I'm not overly like totally excited just by watching him play FIBA basketball, because he is going to have a prominent role as the best player for Australia. Is he going to be the best player for Chicago? If he is, that's probably not a great thing for your franchise. So I'm going back to Steph. I'm not worried about him in the slightest. I think there's a big adjustment that he's still probably trying to make in terms of his role on the team, and that's not just up to him. That's up to his teammates. It's up to Steve as well. There's also the element, like, I think we joke sometimes about, like, oh, is the shortened FIBA 3-point line actually impacting Steph? And it's kind of seen as a joke, but is it a joke? Like, I think it might be a legitimate thing. I know my colleague at Blue Man Hoop, Griffin Gamble, wrote in a piece the other day, like, maybe he should take a few steps back and start taking these deep threes beyond the FIBA 3-point line. Maybe that's actually legit. Like, that's not just a joke. That might be legitimate. So I think there's certainly, again, an adjustment there that Steph might not be necessarily have handled so far at this point. The shooting splits would suggest. So I do think, knowing Steph Curry, that he will have some huge performance here over what you'd imagine is the final 3 games. Like, they should beat Brazil. You'd imagine they'll go through to the gold medal game. But even if they don't, even if they lost the semi-final, they'd get a 3rd game in the bronze medal match. So you'd expect him to put his imprint on this Olympics at some point in the next 3 games, assuming they play that many. That's just who Steph Curry is. We know that he can go through these shooting slumps and come out the other side with a huge performance, and I'd imagine that will be the case. He will have a 20-plus point game here where he goes 5 of 6, 6 of 8 from 3-point range, something like that, and really bursts out of this slump. But I think it also goes to show you that, he's 36 years old, and when you reach this point of your career, it doesn't even take that many poor performances in a row for people to start really questioning, what your level is now. And this is not a 15 to 20 game sample size. This is 3 Olympic games, 3 group games. And therefore, at 36 years old, people are so much quicker to question, oh, is he washed? Is he on the decline? Has he lost a step? Is he not getting his shot off as quick? All these kinds of things, as opposed to obviously being in the middle of your career where you could go through a 10, 15 game stretch where you struggle and everyone's like, it'll be fine, like this kind of thing. So I'm still kind of, it'll be fine at Steph Curry. Like, I still think he's not necessarily in the absolute prime of his career anymore, but he's still close enough to that where he's still one of the best players in the world. And yes, that hasn't necessarily proven to be the case so far in this Olympics, but I'm not too concerned from a Warriors standpoint. I think there's some certain adjustments that Steph and the coaching staff probably haven't necessarily made to the best of their abilities at this point. But I'd expect a big game from him coming up. And then, of course, Guy Santos came off the bench, played 24 and I think 29 minutes in Brazil's first 2 games, but then played 34 the other day against Japan. Was a team high 34 minutes, started. I think he played all of the second half. I think he only rested like the back end of the first half or something like that. Like, it was ridiculous. I watched the entirety of that game. He was passive offensively, I would suggest. He only took 5 shots in 34 minutes. Went 2 of 5. I think it was 1 of 3 from 3-point range. I think he had more of a defensive task going into that game against Japan. Rui Hachimura was out. Kind of left Yuta Watanabe as really the main offensive threat for Japan, although Jordan Hawkinson, I think his name is, the center for Japan, had a big game, as did Bruno Caboclo. Those guys just were going at it offensively and not really guarding each other defensively very well. So that was a fun game, but the Brazilians did enough and won by 18, which allowed them to finish 3rd in the group and finish as one of the 2 third place teams that go through to the quarterfinals. It's a bit of a bizarre setup. Like, I don't think you should be able to finish 3rd in a group and advance to the quarterfinals, but that's just what happens when you've only got 12 teams and 8 make it through. I think there should be 16 teams. I think there should be 4 groups of 4 and just the top 2 go through. I don't really get this. Like, I personally, as Australian, I feel stupid the fact we won a game, lost two, and we're through to the quarterfinals. And we weren't even a third place team. We were second. Like, I thought, like, we were really poor against Greece. Really, really poor. And against Canada, we were okay. That was kind of an expected result. Lost by 10 or whatever. That was expected. Played okay against Spain, but I was just kind of shocked that we played that badly against Greece. And, oh, cool, it doesn't matter. We've lost 2 of our 3 games, yet we're still finished second in the group and advanced to the quarterfinals. So that's a little bit different when you finish second, obviously. But I do think I think going forward, I would like to see a setup where there's 4 groups of 4, top 2 go through, and that's your quarterfinals. I just don't think it's very fair when you've got, 8 teams making it through out of 12. Doesn't make sense to me, but this is like, maybe that's me coming from an AFL Australian rules background, where our final series after 23 weeks is 8 out of 18 teams make it through, so less than 50% make it through to the finals, as obviously here 8 of 12, NBA 16 of 30, over 50%. So I don't know. It's just a minor issue I have with it. But good luck to Guy. Hopefully he can have a big game against the US. But you'd imagine the Team USA will make it through pretty well. They'll play the winner of Serbia and Australia, which, based on current form, Jokic will probably have his way and Serbia will win. I think having lost to Greece, maybe that was a wake-up call we needed, because I think part of that loss to Greece was us disrespecting everyone outside Giannis and thinking, oh, this is just Giannis, and if we cover him, we'll be fine. They had some legitimately good players, Greece, and they got a hold of us, particularly early, obviously in the first half. We mounted a fight back in the second, wasn't good enough. I don't know if we'd be good enough to beat Serbia. I think we're a chance. The odds would suggest Serbia are fairly strong favourites. But, we'll wait and see. I'd imagine whoever wins that, the US will probably deal with fairly comfortably. And then on the other side of the draw, you've got Greece and Germany, which, again, Germany are looking really good at the moment. They're strong favourites to win that. You'd expect them to move through. And then probably the best of the quarterfinal matchups, I think, is Canada v France, where you'd expect Canada to get the job done, but France, the hosts, crowd will be going nuts for them. Wemby, who knows? Looking forward to that one. Anyway, let's get on to the Markkanen chatter. So the latest from Mark Stein today is that essentially the Warriors are still the biggest suitor for Lauri Markkanen, but they're unwilling to give up pods at this stage, and the trade offer from them remains the same, where it's Moody, all the picks, and salary filler, right? And then on the other side of things, there's still the strong belief that Markkanen will re-sign or renegotiate and extend with the Jazz here in the next few days. Again, probably likely to be August 7 onwards, so that takes him out of trade calculations for a full year. I suppose the interesting point that Stein made was that Utah have recently, they've sent coaches over to Finland to hold workouts with Markkanen and young guard Keontae George. It would be an incredible turnaround to do that and then to trade the guy. If you're doing that, if you're sending coaches to Europe, to Finland, to help with workouts, if you're just putting that out as a facade that you're going to do something different, you're putting that up as a facade and then you turn around and do something different. You just can't see that happening, can you? Surely, again, that's not a facade for what their true intentions are, which are to deal Markkanen. Surely that's not the case. So, my optimism on this, as much as I've said that, if anything was to happen, it wouldn't happen until this time that we're now entering. My optimism on this has certainly deteriorated from a couple of weeks ago, just purely based on the reports that we've been getting from pretty much everyone outside of Mike Miller, who said on a podcast, it was also with Shams last week, or in fact earlier, depending on what time zone you're in. It's Monday here for me in Australia. Last week, he stated that he believes the Warriors will get Markkanen. And for those of you that don't know, Mike Miller is not just a former player, notable former NBA champion. He's not just a former player with some random opinion. He is a player agent, right? He is a player agent for Paolo Banchero, Ja Morant. They're probably the two most notable names. So when a player agent, like say, if you just take Mike Miller's name out of it as, former NBA player, if you just say player agent believes the Warriors will get Lauri Markkanen, that's pretty big, I think. And so that's kind of when he said that was my one beacon of hope. I think that you could, as Warrior fans, you could cling to and say, okay, we've got a prominent player agent here saying he believes the Warriors will get Markkanen. So that's the one thing out of, I think, everything that's been said over the last couple of weeks that suggests that a deal could still happen. Now, I feel like in all these discussions that I've had on here, whether it was with Luke last episode, we did go check that out if you haven't already. I think I've been on the fence a little bit with this whole debate of what I'd be willing to give up for Lauri Markkanen. So I want to give, before anything happens, before a trade happens or before Markkanen extends, and I'm assuming that once, assuming he does extend, I think we will get some more reporting after that on more of the trade conversations between the Warriors and Jazz, and we might get some more indication on what the offers were, and because I still think there's conversations to be had here over the next 24, 48 hours where I'd be shocked if I'd be shocked if conversations had ended already. Like I do think the Warriors and Jazz will come together again and have, one final or a few more discussions on what could happen here. Like I don't think it's dead, nothing else is happening. Like I do think there'll be something else going on. Do I think that will be enough for a trade to take place? Probably not at this stage. Again, the growing belief is that Markkanen will stay with the Jazz. But before any of that happens, before we get any of the reports after the extension, before, if a trade takes place, whatever, I want to give what I would do from a Warriors standpoint in terms of my final offer, because right now we've heard Moody, all the picks, salary filler. It's not going to cut it. It is not, that's simply not going to cut it. I would be shocked and be overwhelmed with joy if I wake up or get a notification that the Warriors had traded Moody, the picks, and salary filler, managed to keep Podziemski and Kuminga in a deal for Markkanen. I just don't think it's going to happen. So what would my final offer be? It's not just about the offer, it's about the contingency plan after that. My final offer would be Pods, Moody, GP2, and 2 firsts. And I don't think I'd do more than that. So, I mean, you could argue that, what's the difference between 2 and 3 firsts, or add a first round pick swap? Okay, maybe if they want a second rounder, I'll throw a second rounder on top of the deal. But in terms of like legitimate trade offer, legitimate assets, it's Pods, Moody, 2 picks, and GP2 is the salary filler for Markkanen. That is my high point. I'm not doing more than that. I just think I'm willing to give up Pods. But I can't give you all the picks. That's too much of the future to give up for a guy who is going to want a big extension at max money, who has only ever been an all-star once in his career, has 2 seasons really of being a star, and that was with a pretty bad team. Like, I think there is still some question marks about, okay, can Markkanen do this on a really good team? Like, is he still going to put up the same numbers, same efficiency? We've just been talking about the whole, role between your NBA team and your international team. Well, there's also an element of that when you go from a bad rebuilding team like the Jazz, albeit they've been competitive at times, especially at the start of each of the last 2 seasons. But there's a big difference between going to that to going to play alongside Steph Curry, being the secondary. Maybe Kuminga takes another leap. Maybe you turn into the third guy. You're still going to be able to put up 20 plus points a game on 50, 40, 90, that kind of thing. He could be better. It could also go the other way. He could be better at the Warriors and take another step, which would be extraordinary. But I'm not willing to try that with anything more than Pods, Moody, and 2 firsts, which I think I think it's a pretty good middle ground, to be fair, because the Jazz are rightly going to ask for more than that. The Warriors offer at the moment is well less than that. So that is kind of the sweet spot, I think, where both teams can come together. Now, the other point, and I cannot understate this enough. Sorry, I can't overstate this enough. If the Warriors are willing to give up pods in a trade for Markkanen, they must, and I mean must, to the point of I'm not doing the deal if they do not have a plan in place on what their backup point guard is going to be after the deal. So I would have to have either a deal lined up with the free agent or another trade with another team. Maybe it becomes a 3-team trade, whatever. Like, whatever happens, you need to get another point guard within the next few days. If a trade goes down and I don't see another point guard on the Warrior roster within the space of 48, 72 hours, I'll be getting worried, concerned, right? Because if you deal pods for Markkanen, you have no point guard on the roster outside Steph Curry, unless you want to include Reece Beekman on a 2-way contract. We're not doing that, okay? No disrespect. You're not going to be playing much for the Warriors. I'd be surprised if he's on a 2-way deal because we still don't know what's happening with Quinton Post yet, which is another factor to all of this. Like I've said, are the Warriors waiting to put Post on the main roster if roster spots become available because a trade takes place? Who knows? But I'm not dealing pods for Markkanen without having something else in the way of a backup point guard, because we're not just talking about a backup point guard, right? We are actually talking about a guy who is probably going to start 15, 20 games because history would suggest that's how many games Steph Curry's going to miss. Like, Steph played I think it was an 8-year, 6, 7, 8-year high last year where he played over 70 games for the first time in that period. History would suggest he's playing 60, 65. And therefore, okay, well, that's 20, 25 games you've got to cover for. And so the Warriors, they cannot say, we're going to do this deal and we'll sort the backup point guard situation out later. No, you have to have something in place now. Because what will happen is if teams see that you are desperate for a backup point guard via trade, then all of a sudden the price you might have to pay for that is going to soar because the team will just say, well, no, we want this and we want this. And if you don't give it to us, then, okay, you just don't have a backup point guard. It's on you to make a deal. And now you look at the free agency market, and I was huge, obviously, on Tyus Jones and his potential as a Warrior if Podziemski got dealt. Obviously goes to Phoenix on a minimum deal, huge signing for them. You look at the free agency market now, there is one player on the free agency point guard market that I would be okay with the Warriors signing to a minimum, obviously, and being comfortable with having him as a backup point guard and comfortable enough as a starter for 15, 20 games. The only player available is Markelle Fultz in that scenario. And even then, I'm not like I don't love Fultz. I think I've enjoyed, and he can be, and I'm very happy that he's been able to turn his career around in Orlando like he has. But he's not a guy I think that can play next to Steph. So he's not an ideal option, right? But out of the free agency options left at the point guard position, he's the only one. Like, the second best point guard on the free agency market right now is Dennis Smith Jr. I'm sorry. I don't want to go into next season saying Dennis Smith Jr. is our backup point guard and that guy has to start games when Steph rests or if Steph gets injured. I do not want to be relying on that. You have to have another better option, more proven veteran option in place. Markelle Fultz isn't really even like a proven veteran player at this point. Now, could he do a role for you? Yeah, like I'd be happy with that. I'd be happy with that. If they make this trade and go sign Markelle Fultz to a minimum straight after, cool, good. I'm doing the trade then. I'm doing the trade if that's the case. But other than that, he would almost assuredly have to be another trade in place to make that first deal work. Now, what could that be? There are veteran point guard options on that are probably going to be available on the trade market. Again, what does that look like from a salary matching standpoint? What does it look like from further assets that you would have to give up, given that would have just given up Podziemski, Moody, and 2 picks for Markkanen if that takes place? So the two probably big ones are probably Schroeder in Brooklyn. Like Brooklyn, we know, full-scale rebuild. There's no need for him to be on the roster. Schroeder, which I don't think he's necessarily a great fit for the Warriors as in terms of the way they play, but proven veteran option, $13 million contract, expiring. I can live with it. I can live with Schroeder backup point guard and, again, starting 15, 20 games. Malcolm Brogdon, we know injury prone. The issue with Brogdon is he's on $22 million. You're not, I don't know how you match that from a salary perspective. You'd have to give up Wiggins. And maybe you do that anyway because if you bring in Markkanen and keeping Kuminga, then you cannot keep Wiggins around on that contract long term. If you're willing and going to commit money to Markkanen and Kuminga, you cannot keep Wiggins. So then he does become expendable. Do you use him for Brogdon? A deal I could look at from a Brooklyn perspective, the Warriors going to Brooklyn and saying, okay, here's Wiggins. You'd still have 1 first and pick swaps available, using some combination of those, second and maybe some seconds, whatever. Can we do Wiggins and Guy Santos for Schroeder and Dorian Finney-Smith? And that way you're actually kind of semi-replacing Wiggins as well as this like 3-and-D guy. And then obviously you're getting your backup point guard as well in Schroeder. That would leave you like with a starting lineup, Steph, Melton, Kuminga, Markkanen, and Draymond. And then Schroeder, Buddy Hield, Finney-Smith, Kyle Anderson, TJD, and then Loon would still be on the roster at that point. Maybe you could move him and open up a little bit more flexibility to be able to round out the rest of your roster because you'd essentially have no financial capacity. Given they're up against the first tax apron, they'd have little financial capacity to go out and actually sign any more guys, and they would need to because at this point there's only 12 guys on the roster. Looney would be the 11th. Lindy Waters the 3rd would be the 12th. Right. So I don't even know how they do that from a financial, like those trades you can do from a financial perspective, but then actually rounding out the roster, whether you can do that from a financial perspective, again, you'd probably have to try and move Loon, which if that's a salary dump, then you're giving up even more assets. Like it gets complicated. But the whole point is my final offer is Pods, Moody, GP2 and 2 firsts, but only if you have a backup point guard option in place and a good one. I'm not taking Dennis Smith Jr. I'm sorry. I'm not signing him to a minimum and relying on him to play the games that Steph misses. I'm just not doing that. So to me, it's Fultz. He's the only free agent, or it's a trade. And the trade options look like, again, maybe that net steal, Schroeder and Finney-Smith for Wiggins and more draft assets. Or maybe Brogdon is the other one. But even like Brogdon's injury prone himself, you kind of just have to hope that, the games that Steph rests or is injured, that Brogdon's healthy for those games. He would be great, no doubt. I really like Malcolm Brogdon when he's fit and available. Won 6 Man of the Year with the Celtics a couple of years ago, but then they shipped him right out and they won the championship. So injury prone, can he get healthy again? I think the Clippers were going to trade for him last offseason and then didn't because of the kind of injury concerns. So we'll wait and see. I like him as a player. I think he'd be the perfect, I like him more than Schroeder as a player, but it's injury concerns. It's the contract, $22 million. I think it's an expiring. So you could get away with it where you could trade for him, have that deal expire, and then obviously the Markkanen and Kuminga deals kick in the following season. I don't know. But that is my final answer. Before anything happens here, my final answer is that deal of Pods, Moody, GP2 and 2 firsts for Markkanen, so long as there's a backup point guard in place. Let me know in the comments below if you're on YouTube. What would you do? What would your final offer for Lauri Markkanen be? Do I think that that's going to get it done? No, I think the Jazz will keep Lauri Markkanen and renegotiate his deal and extend. I don't think that deal that I've just put up will get it done. Do I think it should get it done? Yes. I think that is a fair value offer for Lauri Markkanen. I do. And maybe there's some inherent Warrior bias in that. Maybe there is. I do think that Pods, Moody, 2 firsts, and the GP2 salary filler, I think that's a fair deal for Markkanen, where, again, as I said before, the two teams give up a little bit and reach a middle ground here. reach a sweet spot where that's about fair value, right? We could argue that till the cows come home. But personally, I think that's fair. Do I think the Jazz will do it? No. I don't think they will, which is disappointing. But that's as far as I would go from a Warriors standpoint. I'm not going to give you another first round pick because you've got to stop somewhere, right, in these negotiations. You've got to stop somewhere and say, okay, this is my last final offer, right? And the Jazz might come back with something else, and if the something else includes a second round pick, then yeah, cool. But if it includes anything substantial, then that's as far as I'm going. I'm not doing anything else. So we'll wait and see. Again, let me know would you be willing to give up Pods? Is there a situation where the Warriors can keep Pods and Kuminga and get Markkanen? I don't think there is. Let me know if you've got another trade proposal that you think might get it done. Other than that, guys, if you haven't subscribed to the YouTube channel already, that would be greatly appreciated. You can follow me at POK252. That's POK252 on X/Twitter. We'll see if there's any news in the next 48 hours. And if so, I'll be back on the episode. Till then, enjoy the start of your week.